Hello and welcome to episode 100 of the Beginner's Mind podcast. 100, it's today. And I can't believe that I as the podcast host and you as the listener have made it this far. I'm so grateful to have you with me on this journey. When I first started this podcast, I set a goal for myself to reach 100 published episodes, and today is the big day. Back then in 2020, little did I know the impact the podcast would have on me and you as the listeners. Back then, the pandemic presented its own set of challenges, and I found myself searching for ways to support my community in staying relevant during the lockdowns. That's when I discovered the power of podcasting and newsletter as a way to bring people together and combat feelings of isolation. Over the past few years, I have learned, made mistakes, tried new things, and constantly evolved my show. I'm grateful to every single speaker who has been part of this journey, and especially to those who have helped with donations and sponsorships to increase the budget for the show. A special thanks to the listeners for clicking, downloading, commenting, sharing, and spending time with the podcast. In the end, the audience defines every successful show, and I'm happy and grateful to have created something that benefits you, the listener. The statistics show that across all channels, the show serves over 9,000 listeners globally, with the majority residing in Europe, 40% in North America, and 10% in the rest of the world. I'm also excited to share that thanks to partnerships with podcastnotes.org and Biontech.eu, the reach of my show has expanded to over 70,000 thought leaders globally. As I continue to grow and improve my show, I want to thank my listeners for their support. Your downloads, your likes, your comments, your shares, and your follows are crucial in helping me reach a wider audience. I'm committed to promoting scientific entrepreneurship and investing and helping to shape a bright future for humanity as long as I have funding and as long as my listeners show me that my show serves a purpose. To celebrate this occasion, I'm excited to share the 5 most downloaded episodes from the past 3 years. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. Here is number 5, Sascha Bucher from 4051 Ventures. He was in episode 34, which aired February 11, 2021. Are you an entrepreneur trying to navigate the confusing world of investment? Do you wish you had a guide to help you understand how the licensing market works? Then look no further, because Sascha Bucher provides the answers. In this episode of my show, I sat down with Sascha Bucher. He's a venture capital expert with over a decade of experience in deal structuring with the pharmaceutical industry. With a career at top venture funds and companies like Roivant Sciences, Roche, and UPS, Sascha has completed transactions worth billions of dollars. And now he and his team at 4051 Ventures are on a mission to close the life science valley of death in Central Europe and provide life science entrepreneurs with the resources they need to succeed. But the road to success in the drug development industry is not an easy one. It requires deep research, the ability to translate scientific findings into products, and the know-how to bring those products ultimately to the market. And with deal structuring being a B2B business, entrepreneurs must also learn how to negotiate with the pharmaceutical industry and secure multi-billion-dollar contracts. In this conversation, Sascha shares his insider knowledge on how to build relationships with business development, R&D, and C-suite executives in the industry and become a trusted partner. Don't miss this chance to gain valuable insights into the daily life of a venture capitalist and learn how to succeed in the competitive world of drug development.
To concretely answer your question, what you bring to the table, I think it is the know-how to build a company. Many of the things I talked about, ideally, you have people that have worked in the industry, developed compounds themselves, know which are the clinical development plans that you should go for, the indications, putting the teams together, bringing in talent, bringing in fresh talent, diverse talent, that have insights from having done deals before. Something interesting that, talking about Europe, that one still often sees is sort of hedging a little bit for the downside. If you look at the amount of science, or not the amount, the quality of science in Europe, it's outstanding. But oftentimes there's still this fear of, what if I fail? If I actually do this experiment, I might not be successful. So I think that is, this know-how of building, growing companies, and I think also to bring that ambition to the table. I think that is something that venture capitals should do, and that will help entrepreneurs tremendously. And the other thing is understanding the pharma industry, your future partners and acquirers, where they sit and how they work, and how you create a product champion, and how you do the marketing phase, and the things that you in preparation to become a successful company. I think it's those, particularly on those two ends, that it is where a venture capital investor can bring a lot to the table for early startups.
Cool. And what about the other side of the table? So there are still people out there that sort of believe that entrepreneurship will make you rich fast and that basically anyone can do it. But speaking more generally from your experience there, what expectations should life science entrepreneurs have, and what should they be aware about?
Yes, I think it's about entrepreneurship is it's a high risk, high reward. It's a tall order. You have to be prepared, like myself, to many others and entrepreneurs in the industry, to leave a sometimes comfortable or nice job in the industry, and you have to have a lot of passion and the necessary grit, but also expectations that you can achieve many things, but it's a long journey. And it's not a linear one. Things will always pan out differently than you plan for. So I think a lot of risk tolerance and passion is, I think, what people need to bring to the table and expect.
Right. So you mentioned there that you actually sort of left a comfortable job there to go and found 4051 Ventures. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you're doing there, what you're planning to do, and what will actually differentiate you?
Yes, happy to talk about this. Yes, it goes a little bit in the same vein that I spoke about. I see a tremendous opportunity in Central Western Europe. So this includes Austria, Germany, Switzerland, Northern Italy, and the east of France. That part of Europe is, I think, has a top-notch leading science and talent pool that I think still is not exploited or fully exploited or enough exploited, and provides particularly chances for early stage investors. So we're in the process of setting up such a venture fund to do seed financing and also lead Series A's. As I said, seed and Series A leads in that region is what we see too little of, and it's a region where, while all the partners and founders who lived in those we lived actually in the US and the Asias, but we have roots in that area, and it also probably speaks to the fact that you need to know sometimes how to go about things. Europe is sometimes from the outside complex. But again, there's fantastic potential, I believe, or we believe, and that's what we are there to work on, targeting a close mid this year.
We just spoke about it, that VC is just more than just money, and you should actually bring also other things to the table. So what is your track record or the track record of your team, and what makes you actually different from any existing VCs?
Yeah, I think we bring a lot to the table with regards to development, transaction experience across the industry over decades. More importantly, I think we built numerous companies and transacted IPOs or transacted them through M&A or licensing. And importantly, we also have within our partners the track record of having actually brought dozens of compounds into the clinic, including 3 approved products, which is something that for the long term we believe is very essential and a differentiating factor. When particularly investing very early in companies.
Sascha, that's very, very interesting, especially your track record, what you're doing. I think, and also the points that you mentioned about the pristine ecosystem we already have on the science side in Central Europe, especially, and in Europe. And I was smiling when I mentioned Europe might look complex from the outside, but when you're an insider, it looks much different. In my opinion, one of the important parts for every ecosystems are successes in the industry, especially when it comes to acquisition. And last year, we have now 2021, and it was 2020. Themis was acquired by MSD, which I think gives a huge push to the ecosystem in Austria. Are you aware of other deals in our area?
Yes, I have actually been privileged to work with the Roche team when I was deputy head at M&A at Roche, together with Andreas Hohn and the partnering team at Roche, on the acquisition of a company called Totalis. They were in Vienna, actually had office in the Vienna University. That was a company that had a bifunctional monoclonal antibody platform, world-class, outstanding. Was a pretty sizable transaction was still early stage, the company. I believe had like 130 million upfront, 500 million in total, including milestones. And that was fantastic. I think it was a very good transaction for the founders who built this, and was very well deserved. And likewise for Roche, it was a very good addition to their monoclonal antibody product portfolio at the time. And I think there are other examples as well. I think there is clearly top-notch science. I am thinking also about the IMP Institute, which is interesting in the times of COVID. People talk about how collaborative the industry is, which is true, and which I think is fantastic. But this is an example. The IMP Bio-Institute, people probably know this in Austria, but it goes actually back to the 80s, and been a collaboration between Genentech and Boehringer Ingelheim, and still today. Actually, one of our partners worked at the IMP Institute. So a fantastic example how you can actually generate and work together on leading science. So there are definitely examples.
I completely agree with that. Central Europe is an amazing area. We have Switzerland with a huge pharma industry. We have Bavaria. We have Austria, also Czech Republic, for example, with the IOCP, who produced some blockbusters for Gilead in the United States. So on the science and entrepreneur side, there are many people here. Sascha, we have some questions from the audience, and I would like to hand the microphone to the first question. It's from Petronella. Hi, Petronella.
Here is number 4. Anna Trbovich. She was speaker in episode number 37, which aired on March 7, 2021. In this must-listen podcast episode, I explore the cutting-edge use of blockchain technology
in the energy sector with Anna Trbovich. She's the co-founder and COO of Grid Singularity and vice chair of the Energy Web Foundation. With a wealth of experience in entrepreneurship and innovation, including startup life in the Tech Hub of Berlin, Anna offers valuable insights into the ways in which blockchain is revolutionizing the energy industry beyond its well-known utility as a payments system. But Anna's expertise doesn't stop there. She serves on the UNECE Carbon Neutrality and DINA Set-Hub advisory boards and as an independent board member at organizations such as the European Institute for Innovation and Technology, AXA, and the Belgrade Philharmonic. She's also a professor of entrepreneurship at FEFA, a leading business school in Belgrade, Serbia, where she served as dean from 2012 to 2015. Anna's diverse background also includes consulting on good governance, competitiveness, and innovation policy for international organizations such as the European Union and the World Bank. Don't miss this opportunity to learn from a true thought leader in the fields of blockchain and energy.
It is also to Berlin's or even entire Germany's credit that you can easily get work permits for employees who are not from the European Union, which again is not the case in many other EU member states or Switzerland, where it's rather difficult. So that together, I think, has made Berlin really the best place for us to set up in. Naturally, now and even before COVID, remote work was also possible. But the sense of camaraderie, going out for lunch together, which is a wonderful German custom, I certainly believe has contributed to our productivity level.
No, there must be something in Berlin because when we are talking about blockchain technology, Tesla is coming to Berlin as well, as I read in the newspapers.
It's already there. It's already there.
And Elon Musk is also very much into the blockchain technology. When I read his Twitter feed, maybe we have in 1 or 2 years a tweet from Elon Musk about grid singularity. That would be a thing.
Well, it would be a natural fit because they are thinking ahead. So they have already created, they have enabled their cars to participate in energy markets by developing the auto bidder software. Therefore, if there is an energy community that implements a local electricity market with peer-to-peer and community trading, those vehicles can trade as well. And they're ready for that moment. So once we go from MVP to commercial, they will easily integrate. And I believe that other EV manufacturers will follow the same path. We are promoting this development, and all of these energy assets, and a car is an energy asset, in the future will come with their own trading strategies. And there are companies, other startups that we collaborate with that are aiming to optimize such strategies to make the trading smarter for your solar panel or your car or another asset. And there will be a market for that in the future as well, where either you will build your asset with a trading strategy that you develop, or you will buy one on the market and add to your asset so that your asset is smarter when trading. This is not even distant future. Depending on how EU member states implement the energy community directives, it may actually come much faster than we think. The important is to put the infrastructure together and to optimize. And you optimize by supporting business models like trading strategy, algorithm, producers, by improving infrastructure interoperability with decentralized energy asset registries. It is a number of companies and new business models that will come to play in this new energy market.
That's very interesting. I mean, what you mentioned, the car as an asset. So I think you also have to change the perspective I have of a car. Up to now, it was a car is for mobility. So it stands in the garage. But I think the role, after what you said and also what Elon Musk writes, the car is a completely new thing. It's a device with many possibilities to use it for, not only for the mobility. This is quite interesting.
Yeah, you could be earning money with your car and returning some of the initial investment as a result. Certainly,
this would be a great thing.
Well, we are already in the age of dematerialization, so it's basically where we're heading with cars as well in the end. But Anna, you mentioned there also that would you really appreciate also about Berlin is that it's an international place with a diverse set of people. So how much does diversity play a role in innovative businesses?
I'm convinced that it is a critical component of success, and not only by the studies that are readily available on the topic, but also by our practical experience. Our team is diverse in so many ways. We're trying to reach full gender parity. We have almost as many nationalities as colleagues on the team, different faiths, colors, very different aspects, age. And it has certainly raised our productivity level. It has solidified the values that we hold as a company and contributed to our team culture. And I often hear remarks from colleagues how much they appreciate the diversity on the team and enjoy working in such a team. I am very much enjoying working with our current team and feel very fortunate to be able to work with such talented, interesting people who also have a strong sense of personal integrity and who want to work together to achieve impact. Because what we do in the end is very disruptive. Because even though the market is such that it is very logical that you would think that it should be a bottom-up design and that it should be driven by individuals and that you should optimize your renewable assets, it is still the old market design and practice where this distributed reality becomes a challenge to management rather than a solution, and we would like to turn it into a solution.
Great. I mean, also from your insights from having worked at the EIT, where do you see opportunities how we can increase diversity in Europe? Because, for example, what I really liked about the place that I studied in Oxford, the entrepreneurship center there, the Oxford Foundry, has sort of an diversity pledge that says that both startups and investors that want to actually come on board in this facility need to be guided by the values of diversity. And I think it's very good that they actually also include investors there, not just look at startups. So what is your impression? How can we actually improve diversity across European countries?
It's not that difficult, actually. And there are many organizations that have already created a number of proposals. There are VCs, for example, like in the Netherlands, that have pledged that they will not invest in a startup unless they have at least one woman co-founder. And this has led to an increase of diversity in startups there, for example. There are you can be very conscious of the benefits of diversity in your HR, at the executive and board level, because role models are also important. And we're seeing also changes in education, which contributes from early age, and encouragement and mentorship, and a career path where you support colleagues to advance, and to then also contribute to your productivity and your values as a firm or as an organization. And I was surprised to see that the diversity was not very high when I moved to Germany, especially in the energy industry and in the finance industry. And it is changing very slowly. And it's not only the gender issue, but also the fact that you have a number of people who have never worked anywhere else. And if you do not have diversity in terms of backgrounds in many different ways, you will not innovate or be as agile as you need to be. And the world is getting to be more competitive. The energy industry is getting to be more competitive, and it now needs to learn from others and move in that direction. So in that sense, startups can be an example to bigger companies, though not all are like that. And there are a number of startups in Berlin that have little diversity in terms of gender, especially. And it is this wrong premise that you're not able to recruit. And that attitude also needs to change. And but over time, I've seen company founders understand its value and pay more attention. So, there is progress, but it is slow. And it is only recently that the benefits are as acknowledged. At the EIT, which is a European Union body that supports collaboration among researchers, businesses, startups in education in Europe, by supporting programs, educational programs, startup acceleration. Has taken this dimension very seriously. I'm also a member of the Digital Europe Leaders of the World Economic Forum, where we have also discussed this. So leading corporations are taking this to be no longer what was generally viewed as a social issue, but an important economic benefit that should be taken in the management.
And here we are already halfway through. It's the third most downloaded episode. Jonathan Sporn, he's the CEO of Gilgamesh Pharmaceutical. He was part of episode 79, which went live on June 28, 2022. As the world grapples with the global mental health crisis affecting approximately 1 billion people, as the world grapples with the global mental health crisis affecting approximately 1 billion people, some experts believe this number is a gross underestimate. In this must-listen podcast episode, Dr. Jonathan Sporn, CEO of Gilgamesh Pharmaceutical, discusses the unmet medical need in mental health and the potential of novel psychedelic drug development to address this need. Dr. Sporn, a board-certified psychiatrist and assistant professor at Columbia University, shares his extensive knowledge on the history of psychedelic drug development, key players in the field and the essential components of building a successful drug development company. He also discusses the effectiveness of psychedelic drugs in treating mental health issues, the role of artificial intelligence in the field, and the investment sentiment in the United States for developing novel innovations. As society seeks solutions for the mental health crisis, the potential for psychedelic drugs to help alleviate the mental burden on society is a topic of great interest. Don't miss this opportunity to learn from an expert in the field and gain valuable insights on the promising potential of psychedelic drug development.
So I think that's another example where, they decided we're developing S-ketamine and that's the answer. And they surprisingly left on the table what we think is the better isomer compound to develop for psychiatry. S-ketamine is better for anesthesia, I think, where it's used around the world. But our ketamine looks like it's the better drug for psychiatry because that stereochemistry creates different physical chemical properties, because drugs are binding in receptors that have three-dimensional, configurations. So that's another example where, there's a problem in terms of innovation at these big organizations. And so I left there and went to Pfizer and, but along the way, then you learn how to run big projects and you learn how to, you learn a tremendous amount from these organizations are very, resource rich. And so I left J&J. My wife got a job at professorship at Columbia. So I left J&J, moved to Pfizer. But eventually it was the same sort of story where, Pfizer also, was very bureaucratic and very political and was spending a tremendous amount of money and getting, I didn't think a whole lot out of their research efforts, at least in psychiatry. And they figured that out finally and decided to leave.
One more question from my end. You mentioned Pfizer. In these days, Pfizer did still allocate large budgets to early stage research. When I now look on the pharma industry, it looks to me that all these big corporations focus more on marketing drugs and getting the regulatory approval processes done and do the large scale phase 3 trials, but not the earlier stages. But in these days, Pfizer was also, and J&J were also involved in early stage research.
Yeah, no, I think they're always doing early stage research at all these big companies, but they oftentimes, I think, don't end up being the best at doing that early stage research. And I think
what's your opinion? Why is that? Why is early stage research better in small companies than big corporations?
I think I think if you study the culture of a biotech and then study the culture of a big pharmaceutical company, there's a passion and a focus and an energy and a scrappiness and a being able to make decisions. At Pfizer, all decisions were political and took forever. And at a biotech, the decision is made because somebody calls me, and that's it, So and of course, most biotechs will fail, but there'll be enough of them to succeed. And when they do, they tend to often be, quite. So it's not entirely the case. There have been plenty of drugs, of course, being developed by big companies, but it's often this cultural issue. So if you look at like when the statins first got developed, Merck developed the first statin, but at the time, Roy Vagelos could come from St. Louis, and it Merck was not doing all that well, and he kind of pulled up some dejected chemists from the basement and started drawing things on the blackboards, and had a vision, and a passion for, like, this is how we're going to create the next drug for cardiovascular disorders, and the science was ripe for that, and he had, so he brought that excitement and vision and to Merck, and that. But of course, in the end, Pfizer, then marketed Lipitor, which became even a bigger drug. So the first horse, it doesn't always win. The first horse out of the gate doesn't win the race necessarily. But I think, again, that's sort of, even that in that case where Merck was a big company, it was that Vagelos coming and creating that excitement and energy and kind of new vision and blood and sort of leadership, the kind of, and big companies, it just tends to become sort of mechanical and somewhat bureaucratic, and you're always sort of fighting up against the commercial people and they have strategies that they develop that only allows you to do this and this, even though you're kind of aware, like, it'd be better if you didn't do that. But that doesn't, we're not interested in anything unless it has 9 zeros after it, the sort of thing, where smaller companies don't think that way. So I think that sort of combination of things.
I think there is, it's like at the army. Sometimes you need troops, and sometimes for some tasks, special forces are just better at smaller groups, and they're much quicker. And I think it's the same with small biotechs and large pharma. So some tasks, especially the early stage development, is better allocated in small biotechs, and because they're faster decision-making processes, more passion, getting things done, moving forward. And when I think, for example, at mRNA vaccines, it's one of the recent examples. Biontech and Pfizer, once drugs really need to be spun out or pushed at scale to patients, I think the large pharma groups are the best solution for that. Just imagine a small biotech building 10 sales forces would next to be impossible. So I think there is good and bad sides in both worlds.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, big pharma was in some ways it was great for me, because I, first of all, I steal all their people, and also it just really, gave me a background, in so many things. It was like a 10-year training program or something.
You had everything. You had university background, psychiatry, then you went to NIH for research, doing research, and then the big pharma background. And then, from what you were saying, the logical decision then was to found your own company. When did that happen? When did you make the decision the first time? Did you say, okay, let's start something on my own?
Well, yeah, I was the clinical disease area expert at Pfizer for neuroscience and in the psychiatry area, and so I could see things kind of going downhill in terms of Pfizer's interest in psychiatry, and they really didn't put much effort into that, and I realized that they were going to leave neuroscience, so I had to figure out, well, what do you want to do next? And I tend to be a little restless. I don't want to do the same thing, and I don't want to do something bureaucratic and repetitive. So, and then I went to a meeting of the American College of Neuropsychopharmacology, the ACNP, which is this very elite organization that has a meeting every year, and I heard talks on the whole, this whole glutamatergic ketamine space, which I had sort of been out of, for many years. And I was trying to make sense of the whole thing. And there was a lot of contradictory data, and it was unclear what was going on. And then this guy named Kenji Hashimoto from Chiba University, Japan, gave a talk on R-ketamine. And as I listened to this talk, I was like, it sort of came to my mind that he may be right, and nobody seems to be quite registering that. And I think that happens quite a bit too. There's sort of everybody's kind of going down, some orthodox route, and he kind of came with this idea that, and also there wasn't a strong understanding, like, well, why, R-ketamine's weaker, has weaker binding to its receptor, which is the NMDA receptor. So why would you pick the weaker isomer if you have a choice? Why would that be better? That doesn't make any sense. But I sort of realized, like, the NMDA receptor is very complex, and it has variations across the brain and subunit composition. So there was a lot we didn't know. And so it was sort of my empirical sense was like, this may be right. And so I met with them, and I brought my old boss from Pfizer into the picture, Jake Kranzler, who had a lot of biotech experience, and we sort of negotiated with the university to license R-ketamine, and that we decided we would develop that as a drug. And we had a little trouble because of the fact that people were like incredulous, because they were like, well, you can't be right, because J&J, if you were right, J&J would have been all over this, because they're like this giant company with all of these, intelligence people and thousands of scientists. Like, how could it be that they're like, you just come along, you just as a person and do this? And so people were they didn't really, and J&J was also very defensive about this, because of course, if I was right, they looked not too great. So there was a lot of internal, kind of anger from the J&J people at my old NIH colleagues and what happened was that there was my old colleagues at NIH, Carlos Zarate and company, and Todd Gould, they published a paper in Nature that essentially said that what's really going on is that there's a metabolite of R-ketamine, of the R isomer, called 2R6R hydroxynorketamine, and it's that metabolite that actually is what causes this antidepressant effect. And so it wasn't clear that they were right, but they replicated this R-ketamine data. But the NIH then said, well, we'll license to a company this metabolite, because they had patented it. And so all the companies went scurrying off to try to to try to license this patented metabolite. And this left R-ketamine and the Japanese like sitting there, and nobody was interested. So I was able to write them a check, and for a very small amount of money, license in the compound and start to develop the program. So this
did I get it right? This was the foundation basically of perception or neuroscience, your first company.
Right. And this was, in perception, Jim Morrison had the doors from the doors of perception. I took the doors of perception. And so we started, so I started perception and perception neuroscience. We started to get the trials planned and preclinical work going. And then as we were doing that, we needed to raise money. And a couple of different folks came along, including Christian Engermeyer, who was now enamored with psilocybin and psychedelics and wanted to build like the Bridge Bio or Roivant kind of model and things. And he was him and George Goldsmith, who runs Compass, they were very intent on doing a deal to buy a controlling share in perception. And so I negotiated a deal with them, so that perception got funded and moved forward. So that's how that, and now it's in phase 2. development, which is happening in the US. And
here we are at the second most downloaded podcast episode. It is with Heike Schön. She was part of episode 71, which aired on March 28, 2022. Clinical trial failures are too common in the pharmaceutical industry, with nearly 90% of product ideas failing in the clinics. While efficacy is often the main reason for failure, other factors can be managed to increase the chances of success. These failures can be costly for sponsors and investors, but taking steps to eliminate manageable sources of failure can save time and expenses. In this podcast episode, Heike Schön, she is the managing director and co-founder of Lumis International and Lumis Consulting. Together, they form the Lumis Group. Shares her expertise on clinical drug development and clinical trials. She has over 25 years of experience in leadership positions in international clinical research and drug development. Heike offers valuable insights into the clinical trial process, regulatory requirements, and strategies for getting a clinical trial back on track. She also discusses the trend towards in-house versus outsourced clinical study management and shares her predictions for the future of clinical trials. Tune into this episode to learn from a leading expert in the field of rescuing clinical trials.
So, we have ICH-GCP and the revision of R2, which clearly defines the role of the sponsor. And you have to comply as a sponsor with the duties. You have to oversee the clinical trial. You have to prove that you oversee the clinical trial. You have to have the finances when you start your clinical trial. You cannot make a full contract, for example, when you don't have the full amount of money. You can go for part contracts. And so you have to make sure that the protocol is in adherence with the disease, with the indication. So there's a lot of roles. The quality management is a big issue. Of course, as a sponsor, you have to ensure that your quality management systems is in place for the whole activities around drug development. And all these activities have to be done. And so that means why do you have to do this? Of course, to guarantee the safety of the patients, but also to be at any time inspection ready. You might not have an inspection when it comes to your first in-human study, but at latest at phase 2, inspections could come up, and they will look really at the details, how you did your oversight, your planning, your vendor selection, how did you validate your vendors, how did you qualify your vendors. These are all the activities you have to ensure in a proper way. And the good thing is FDA and EMA, they publish inspection reports, which is very interesting if you want to learn what to avoid. And that's also these inspection reports, they always lead to changes in regulations, to adapting regulations. That was one of the reasons why ICH was also revised, because more and more technology became important in clinical trials. That means also for a sponsor to ensure that all their vendors providing the technology have validated systems, revalidated systems. And these were findings from inspections, which then led to a change in ICH-GCP.
And let me ask you one question: who should feel as a sponsor? So, what organization? Is it the CRO or is it the company with the money bag that hands over?
No, the CRO is definitely the service provider, and that's also defined in GCP. The sponsor is the company providing the financing and the organization for the compound for the clinical trial. Of course, you can also be co-sponsor so that you have two different companies moving forward, but the responsibility is with the sponsor, not with the CRO. They have other responsibilities.
So basically you can say there's no time to sit on the beach because a company...
Unfortunately not.
So any company that raises money and that engages a CRO for conducting a clinical trial and hands over their money back is then automatically the sponsor. And it's within the responsibility of the sponsor that everything runs well in the clinical trial, and when push comes to shove, the regulatory authorities go to the sponsor and not to the CRO. Is that the right understanding that I got?
No, the CROs will also be inspected. So when you have an inspection on a clinical study, let's say in a phase 3, then the inspectors go to the sponsor, to the CRO, and to the sites. So they do quite a multifaceted inspection to see whether the study is in compliance with the regulatory requirements and guidelines. No, this will be all over. But the sponsor company, not the investor gives the money, but the sponsor company who defines what the plan will be, what the drug will be, they are the main responsible party.
So basically, when we talk about, I think everybody knows Biontech, meanwhile, after 2 years in the pandemic and the vaccine development. So basically, the sponsor of the clinical trials was then Biontech, but yes. Not the shareholders of Biontech.
No, not the shareholders. The shareholders might be the responsible part, not the investors, but the shareholders. So that I think we have to maybe distinguish here.
Yeah, but the executives at the end of the day are then responsible that everything runs fine in the company. And it's similar in the private market. So the investor, the VCs that give the money are not the sponsors, but it's the company in between it. The executive board then has the responsibility for the clinical trial and should be ready to be inspected once they dose the first patient. Mm-hmm. This leads me to the next question. What is your recommendation for the time that the company should then take to plan a clinical trial properly?
Yeah, this is also, again, a backward approach. I mean, there are different aspects to it when to start preparing a clinical trial. One key aspect for me is what takes the longest to prepare. That could be the drug, the investigational drug. Because sometimes, depending on the ingredients, it could take up to 1 year that everything can be ready. You have to get the material from wherever. So I think you have to consider always what takes the longest time to be developed. Because maybe you want to start in 12 months a clinical trial, but you need 16 months to prepare your investigational medicine. A product, you should start earlier. And from this on, you can start preparing further on. And I think, and companies do it very different. I have realized sometimes they do on short notice the CRO selection, others they start already 1 year before the study starts to really talk with CROs, to get the input from CROs, to get the input from specialists. I think I would always allow for much more time to prepare and to discuss in detail the plan of the clinical study with the regulatory authorities. You might go for scientific advice meetings. You might discuss with certain authorities. And so therefore, at a minimum is 1 year, but the more, the better.
So a minimum is 1 year that should be taken into consideration also in the planning when asking for money. And you mentioned before, the clinical trial needs to be financed entirely before filing with the authorities.
It should be. It's a recommendation. I mean, of course, it is not always possible. But if you can foresee that you might have an issue with the financing, then and CROs are used to it, you can have maybe only a contract covering the study startup, because then you can have some results in the study startup with the CRO. Because it is also a problem when in the middle of the clinical trial, suddenly you have no budget to continue. So this is not in the interest of patients, not of the authorities, and definitely not of the sites. So I think you should be more careful in the financing process. When you start your clinical trial, you should have the awareness about what is needed throughout until the end.
I couldn't agree more. Having properly financed company and also the resources set up helps then moving forward. Let's jump to the time when the study started. I very often get the perception that the study oversight is also an easy-cheesy job, even with the inspections of authorities. And sometimes companies say, why should I engage outside people? I have a lot of assistants in the company. They can do the study oversight quite easily. Besides the other duties, because what do you have to do? You have to just collect a few reports and that's it. What is your recommendation when it comes to clinical study management, in-house versus out-house clinical study management? What really needs to be done in Europe?
Well, if you, for example, the CRO is conducting your clinical trial, and you have to make oversight management of the different activities. I think it's not really a job of an assistant, because you need a specific knowledge. You should have experienced people, medical person or project managers who can conduct the oversight, you have the awareness about what can happen in a clinical trial, the perspective, the risk management approach. I mean, this is a classical risk management approach, where you consider what can happen and how can you mitigate the risks. And so that means even if you have a very good clinical trial assistant, he cannot cover all of the activities, only parts of it. And we always recommend a little rule of thumb, but don't ask me how I derive it. It's when you outsource a clinical trial, for every 6 to 7 person working in the CRO, you should have 1 person conducting oversight in your company.
Whoa. Let's stop a little bit. For every 6 to 7?
Yeah, let's say 5 to 7 person. For every 5 to 7 person in a CRO working on your clinical trial, you should have 1 person in your company performing oversight. So if you go for a phase 2 clinical study to be easily in 3-4 different countries, you have at least, let's say, 15 monitors who will work at the CRO to oversee the activities at the sites, 10 to 50 monitors. So that means you have to do some proper oversight management, at least with 1 to 2 person in your own company, to properly work together with the CRAs to review their reports, to use the dashboard the CRO is providing, to look at regular reports, meeting minutes. So this is a kind of a relationship. So that means you have always to consider carefully as a company how many people you have with experience who can do the oversight management. And it depends, of course, in the different phases of the study, and it depends on the different timelines of the study. A study startup is much more resource intensive than later at the end when it comes to statistical analysis and reporting.
So can you give a little bit of insight what proper oversight management should look like in your opinion? So with a little bit more detail.
Wow. I mean, yeah, it's the oversight, of course, what is possible depends also on the CRO you're working with. Meanwhile, a lot of CROs provide excellent business intelligence so that you get access as a sponsor to their dashboard. You can have real-time data, you see what is going on. And this is one thing, but of course, there are a lot of smaller CROs who might not have this technology, but still have a lot of possibilities that you can have access to the reports. So at least what you need to know is as real as possible what is happening in your clinical trial. And then you should always know really what is impacting the clinical trial, the timelines, the costs, the safety of the clinical trial. So we recommend to have good key performance indicators as an oversight measurement tool. If you have key performance, and you don't need many, I mean, it's, let's say 7 to 10 key performance indicators, well chosen, what has the highest impact on a clinical trial, and these can be measured. These key performance indicators can be developed together with the CRO. They have the systems, the data management system, for example, the study startup system. So you define together with them, you get regular reports on the key performance indicator. You don't need to do this by yourself. This is another problem a lot of sponsors have, that they do micromanagement on the CROs. And they double the work. They do a lot of Excel trackers. So I saw biotech companies where I said, okay, these are companies consisting of Excel trackers. Yeah, they tracked everything, but then they lost oversight on all what they tracked. This is not the reason. This is not the sense of oversight. The oversight should really provide you with a clear picture where your clinical trial stands, and also with alerts if something goes wrong. Then you do proper oversight.
Yeah, and I also believe it's a lot about relationship management with people. I mean, when I think CROs usually work with more companies, and if I as a sponsor want to have a high priority, it's always good to stay in touch with people and manage the relationship so that they feel that the sponsor is also engaged in the study. It was not in the life science industry, it was more in the agriculture industry, but I learned very well back in 2002, 3 and 4, how things change to the better when people are in touch with the person who pays the bills at the end of the day, and things move more smoothly and more quickly.
Absolutely. And this brings to another point, which is very important. Good that you mentioned the relationship. It is the relationship, but it's also the understanding the different cultures. I mean, sometimes we have, small biotech companies, the smallest one I worked with had 3 people, and everything was outsourced. And they have a culture, of course, the decision-making process is without discussions. It's just done by the CEO. The CRO themselves were a couple of hundred people. Of course, they had a structure, an organigram. They had very complex decision-making processes. And this can really cause a culture clash because the smaller company was not used to discuss much. And then they suddenly expected decision-making power of people who didn't have any decision-making power. So it's very important for both parties to understand each other's culture and to accept the differences and to work with the differences. And for small companies, you can always consider that the CRO is much bigger and much more complex in the organization than yourself. And so I think then the relationship building is even more important, but to make sure that you understand each other on a very good level.
I think this is sometimes very challenging because it's not only the culture between the different sizes of the company. So you have these small biotechs with a few people, highly specialized, and then you have the big structures of CROs. Also, trials are very often set up in different countries. And as we are in Europe, every country is proud of their own culture. So
and language.
and language on top of that.
Yeah.
And non-native speakers, we always try to do our best in English, but let's face it, we are not native speakers.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of management that needs to be done. And I think sponsors, any biotech company that raises funds from investors should plan that upfront and tell the investor what they believe is really necessary to get done so that the clinical trial is at the end of the day successful. So basically, it's not taking a Coke and popcorn and relax and sit down. It's hard work that needs to be done.
Yeah, it is hard work. And it's a lot. It can be easily underestimated, the resources which are needed, the budget which is needed, and maybe also additional resources you have to add to your company. I have made experience that suddenly a company starts with a phase 2 clinical trial, having 35 sites involved in different countries, and they themselves had 2 people working in the finance department. And suddenly all these 2 people on top should check investigator invoices of 35 sites, and it was impossible. So, these are things you have to be also prepared to outsource clinical studies or to run a clinical trial and know what additional resources you might need besides the clinical people, besides the operational people.
So it's not only setting up one contract and then the work is done, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately not.
Can we come up? I started writing with the pandemic 2 years ago, and I did a little bit of research in how to structure articles. And what goes always very well is these 3-step processes, and this 3-step checklist is for sponsors. Can we turn it into a 3-step checklist for sponsors to keep studies on track? What needs to be done? What are the 3 most important steps in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, I think one is what we just talked about is establish a very well communication tool with the CRO, with the vendors. It can be through a governance charter, but really establish good communication with the CRO and very transparent. What we have experienced and what we always recommend is that a sponsor should be very clear on its expectations. Because it's often say, oh yeah, this is a nice CRO, we give it to them, they're nice people, and they just hand over the study. But then suddenly things are happening. Nobody talked before about it. And it was obvious that these expectations were not very clearly communicated to the CRO, to the vendor. Then they do what they think is the right thing. And this could also be a very different opinion from both sides. So I think clear expectations at the beginning, clear developed roles and responsibilities would be the second part. And the third part is also what we just talked, try to develop a good business intelligence, a dashboard, make sure that you have your KPIs in place and work with your KPIs for the study performance.
And here we are. It's the most downloaded episode, and the winner comes from my country, Austria. He lives in the most livable city, Vienna. He was one of my first podcast guests. His episode was episode number 9, which aired on April Fool's Day, April 1, 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. It's really hard to believe that I'm almost done with recording the episode 100. When I started on this journey, I could never have anticipated its impact on my listeners and me. That's why I'm so grateful to bring back Alexander Belcredi. He is the co-founder of Phagomed that later was acquired by the German company Biontech. Alexander Belcredi discussed with me how entrepreneurs can create unexpected results in business. His episode, recorded in March 2020, got the most downloads so far. Alexander and his co-CEO Lorenzo Corsini started their company in 2015 with the goal of developing alternatives to antibiotics. In April 2020, they were fundraising for their company, and just 2 years later, they signed an acquisition deal with Biontech. In this episode, Alexander discusses Phagomed's novel approach to treating bacterial infections without antibiotics, their challenges in drug development, and the competitive landscape in the antibacterial industry. He also provides insights into the clinical development process, the importance of preparing for fundraising, and the role of European public funds in leveraging private investments. Tune in to learn more about Phagomed's innovative approach to treating bacterial infections and how he and Lorenzo Corsini achieved such unexpected success in business.
Very happy to share a bit of light on that. First of all, so I'm the co-CEO, so we're actually 2 CEOs. Lorenzo and myself lead the company. What motivated me to get into this? So I've always been very much attracted to the life science field. My mother is a doctor. I've always had a strong interest in everything medical. I didn't really decide to study it. In retrospect, myself sometimes not sure why, but I took more of a business route. I studied history and economics, and then entered a consulting company in a consulting track. And at that point, immediately decided that the field I wanted to be close to is the healthcare field. And so during my time as a consultant, I worked for healthcare companies, pharma companies, medical technologies companies. And at some point, I stumbled upon the topic of bacteriophages and the antibiotic crisis that we're facing. And one thing led to the other. And at the end, I felt the need to quit my consulting job and start a company in this field. And that company is now Phagomed.
So you are one of the founders of Phagomed. How did it come to the foundation of the company?
So that was a long time in preparation. So if I remember correctly, the first time that I got into contact with phages was around about 2012, 2013. My father-in-law is a German surgeon who had been treating patients with phages in Germany in individual settings, experimental settings, when all antibiotics had failed. And he was interested in understanding why we didn't have any phage-based pharmaceuticals that he could use more regularly with his patients. And that sort of question and that frustration also on his part got me interested into the whole field and led to myself asking the question, well, why don't we actually have phage-based pharmaceuticals? And then at some point also attracted my co-founder Lorenzo to the question, who's a molecular biologist. And so then the three of us started looking into the phage field. My father-in-law as the surgeon who's used phages, Lorenzo as the molecular biologist, and myself as sort of a business person. And we decided that we wanted to do something about it. And then in 2017, found the company.
So basically, half of the company is family-owned, or 2/3 are family-owned. So it's your father-in-law and yourself, and then your partner, which brings together the founders team. What skills do you recommend when you found a company?
I think there's a ton of different skills that you need. I think if you found a life science company, then obviously it's important to have somebody in the founding team who really understands the science. And in our case, that's Lorenzo, who has a very deep knowledge about molecular biology, but also in particular phages by now and how we can use them. It's also good to have a bit of a business skill set. So that's probably the role that I play and that I could contribute, of having sort of a very economics and business focused mindset to bring to the table. And then it helps to have somebody who understands what you would do with the product. And for that, Bucher, sort of my father-in-law, the surgeon in the team, was also a great asset because he had used phages and he was able to, from the start, guide us as to where we could maybe make a difference with the phage-based pharmaceutical. So I think it's the combination of different skills that you need. Whether they all need to be in the founder team, I think that's an open question. In our setting, that was for sure one of the things that we felt was an advantage, is that we had a strong science perspective, a strong business perspective, and a strong medical perspective in the founding team.
Oh, I absolutely see that and recommend it to start with the skill sets that you mentioned. You were talking a lot about phages. I am a business person myself and have limited understanding of science. Could you explain a little bit what Phargomed is doing?
Sure. So you probably read and you're aware that we are running out of antibiotics that work. And the simple reason is that the bacteria are becoming more and more resistant to the antibiotics that we've developed. And that's actually a huge challenge because so much of our medicine is built on having antibiotics that protect us from infections. For example, during any type of surgery, you will get antibiotics to make sure that there are no surgical site infections or other type of infections happening, but also in bacterial infections that we contract by other means, antibiotics obviously stay the standard of care. So it's really scary to think about antibiotics no longer working or no longer being there. Now, in nature, bacteria have a natural enemy, and these enemies are viruses called phages, that have co-evolved with bacteria over the past billion of years and have one function, and that's to hunt, infect, and kill bacteria. And so now what we do at Phargomed is we find ways to take these natural viruses, these phages, and bring them into a drug that we can actually use in patients in situations in which antibiotics fail.
That's very interesting. So basically, you're using viruses to fight bacteria, if I understand it right.
Exactly. And then maybe in today's time and place, it's very important to mention that phages are very particular viruses. So they only infect bacterial cells. And it's sometimes the word virus has very negative connotations because we sort of associate it with bad diseases. And in the current pandemic, I think it's very clear that there are some very harmful viruses out there. It's sometimes important to note that talking about a virus is a bit like talking about transportation. A train is a very different animal from a bicycle, and the same holds with viruses. So phages are viruses, those kinds of viruses that only infect bacterial cells, and in that function might actually save our lives.
You mentioned antibiotics business. I started myself my career in life science with Trbovich. It's a listed company meanwhile, and they are doing research in antibiotics. How do you see the situation, generally speaking, in the world with antibiotics? I mean, we have a lot of companies who are doing research in that field. Why do you believe we are running into a situation with antibiotics?
I think there's multiple reasons. I think the first one is there are not enough companies researching new antibacterials. So if you look across the globe, there are very few new registrations of novel type of antibiotics happening. I think actually Trbovich, the company you mentioned, is sort of the last company to successfully bring an antibiotic to market in the US. And then that's one of just a very handful in the past 2 decades. So it's, we don't have enough companies doing research in the field. We also don't have an attractive economic climate for traditional antibiotics. So we've been extremely successful at driving down the price of antibiotics. Most of them are genericized today. And so it's unclear whether, if you're able to bring a novel antibiotic to market, what kind of a price point can you attain, and will that be attractive And as I said, that's particularly a problem for small molecule antibiotics. So it's a challenging field from multiple perspectives. But I think at the same time, what's clear is we are just as affected by bacterial infections as we were, 10, 20, 30 years ago. They are a fact of life. Every one of us has them. Many will have serious bacterial infections. We're just running out of the drug that was supposed to keep us safe.
Okay, so this is it in a nutshell. We are running out of antibiotics currently, and the field you're doing research in might be a potential solution. How is the competition in your field?
I always joke that the competition is not big enough yet. The reality is phage-based pharmaceuticals are making a very slow comeback. So we've known about phages for about 100 years. In the 1920s and 1930s, actually many companies sold phage solutions, but back then we didn't really understand phage biology. We didn't properly understand the etiology of many infections. And when small molecule antibiotics, and the first one was penicillin, came along, that wiped out the market of phage pharmaceuticals, and for a good reason. Now we're sort of 80 years later, and we find that antibiotics are sort of losing their edge, and we need to start to reinvestigate all the routes that we have, and phages are an important route that we take. Now, to come back to your question, we sort of track globally between 10 and 15 companies doing similar things to what we do, mostly in different indications. So what we already see is that other phage companies, they tend to place a slightly different focus, either in terms of technology that they're using or in terms of indication. And so we don't really see them as competitors for now, but rather our peers. I think together we have the responsibility to show and to demonstrate that phage-based pharmaceuticals can make a big difference. And that's the first goal. And so any clinical trial that happens in this space, I think it's good news for everybody else in the field. And we need to break through the sound barrier of showing that phage-based pharmaceuticals can have an impact. And the more companies join us in that, the better.
Yeah, I would like to understand your area in the industry a little bit better. Are there already any companies in the clinic currently?
You have two companies that are in the clinic in the US for complicated urinary tract infections and for acne. And they are in phase 1 trials. So it's very early. You have two failed clinical trials. So you have two unsuccessful clinical trials with phages in Europe and in Asia that mostly failed for rather sort of non-drug topics. So the European one failed due to manufacturing. They weren't able to keep the phages stable. And so when they gave them to the patient, they actually had lost all of their efficacy. So I think that's a well understood challenge now, but that's also been solved by the companies now in phase 1 trials in the US. And the one in Asia failed because the etiology of the disease was misunderstood. So there, the assumption was that a certain variant of E. coli was causing diarrhea, and the phages were very successful in killing that variant of E. coli, but the disease didn't go away. And so the hypothesis was not the right one there. So you have these initial clinical efforts, and I think we've learned from the ones that have not been that successful. And now my hope is that in 2020, 2021, we will see initial trials with phages that show very clear efficacy. And I think the beauty about phages that we haven't talked about it before is because phages are incredibly precise. So phages will infect only a specific species of bacteria. And so they are, to us as humans, also incredibly safe. We don't know of any side effects. All the trials that I've done so far have not shown any side effects. So the gold standard for phages is showing efficacy. And that's what needs to be done next for us as an industry.
Now, at the end of episode 100, I want to give a brief look out to the future of the podcast. And as I look ahead to 2023, I have set ambitious goals to help grow and expand the podcast further. Here is to at least another 100 episodes. One of the key objectives is to transform the podcast even further into a video show, which will provide a more effective platform for promoting the speakers, their brands, their messages, and their voices. To achieve this goal, I am actively seeking speakers who can help spread important information in the following areas: holistic health, preventive medicine, and well-being, first part. Second part is pharma and health tech. The third part is artificial intelligence. The fourth part, climate change. And the fifth part of recordings that I want to do in this year should cover the topics entrepreneurship and investing. So if you know someone who fits into this profile, please reach out to me and make a first contact and a first introduction. The other goals for 2023 include doubling the organic reach on social media, which means growing from 9,000 followers and listeners to over 18,000. Creating more media partnerships that we even further increase the outreach for our speakers on the podcast. And of course, to fund and finance the show, increasing the cash flows to support the social media marketing of partners' brands. And I also aim to produce at least 50 more episodes featuring engaging speakers and get their message out into the market. The slogan for this year is that the podcast team helps amplify the speakers' voices and brands. Overall, I'm excited about the opportunities and challenges that lie ahead in 2023. I'm committed to achieve these goals and positively impacting our community. This was episode 100. Thank you for listening, and I see you in the next 100 episodes. Did you like this episode? Then please like, comment, and share this episode. It helps that the content reaches other people who can benefit from the know-how of the speakers on the show. Have a great day.